What is up, everybody? We're on day 89 of our Bible in a Year series. Last day of 1 Samuel. I told you yesterday it's going to be weird. It's going to be interesting. I not promised, but I said we'll tie in the Bible, Star Wars, and talking to the dead. So it's quite the promise. Not promise, but yeah. It's quite the statement. So we'll get into it. In 1 Samuel 28. Okay. At the time, the Philistines gathered their military units into one army to fight against Israel. So Achish said to David, "You know, of course, that you and your men must march out in the army with me." David replied to Achish, "Good. You will find out what your servant can do." So Achish said to David, "Very well, I will appoint you as my permanent bodyguard." By this time, Samuel had died. All Israel had mourned for him and buried him in Ramah, his city. And Saul had removed the mediums and spiritists from the land. The Philistines gathered and camped at Shunem. So Saul gathered all Israel, and they camped at Gilboa. When Saul saw the Philistine camp, he was afraid, and his heart pounded. He inquired of the Lord, but the Lord did not answer him in dreams or by the prophet Urim, or by the Urim or by the prophets. Saul then said to his servants, "Find me a woman who is a medium, so I can go and consult her." You're not supposed to do this. His servants replied, "There's a woman at Endor who is a medium." Ooh, Endor. It's a planet in Star Wars. Okay. Verse 8. Saul disguised himself by putting on different clothes and set out with two of his men. They came to the woman at night, and Saul said, "Consult a spirit for me. Bring up for me the one I tell you." But the woman said to him, "You surely know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you setting a trap for me to get killed?" Then Saul swore to her by the Lord, "As surely as the Lord lives, no punishment will come to you from this." "Who is it that you want me to bring up for you?" the woman asked. "Bring up Samuel for me," he answered. When the woman saw Samuel, she screamed, and then she asked Saul, "Why did you deceive me? You are Saul." But the king said to her, "Don't be afraid. What do you see?" "I see a spirit coming up out of the earth," the woman answered. Then Saul asked her, "What does he look like?" "An old man is coming up," she replied. "He's wearing a robe." Then Saul knew it was Samuel, and he knelt low to his face to the ground and paid homage. So, we'll read this next one. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Samuel asked Saul. "I'm in serious trouble," replied Saul. "The Philistines are fighting against me, and God has turned away from me. He doesn't answer me anymore, either through the prophets or in dreams. So I've called on you to tell me what I should do." So, this is not an evil spirit, right? And we can see that because we know that what Saul is doing is bad. We know it's evil. You're not to contact the dead. Saul is trying to contact the dead, and the spirit is kind of scolding him, and we'll get into it a little bit more even going further. But there's a reprimand here. Like, this is not looked at as a good thing. The spirit that is being called up is not taking this as a good thing. If there is a spirit or someone that is encouraging following God's law and God's ways, chances are it's probably not a good spirit. Also, this uh, medium, witch, or whatever, freaks out when this works. Um, so this is, I don't know, it's an interesting story, but I think it definitely leads to the idea that there's a lot of spiritual stuff like this around. There is spiritual power outside of God. Now it's nowhere compared to God, but there is power in some of this stuff, and a lot of all of it is demonic, but there's still a power there. People don't do things because they just want to, and it doesn't, like, there's legitimate power behind some of the stuff. We see with witchcraft, with voodoo, and things like that. Now, I don't think it happens because of the reason that these people think it happens. I think that there's just stuff that people do, and demons do things, and it keeps those people away from God. Verse 16. Samuel answered, "Since the Lord has turned away from you and has become your enemy, why are you asking me? The Lord has done exactly what he said through me. The Lord has torn the kingship out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. You did not obey the Lord and did not carry out his burning anger against Amalek. Therefore, the Lord has done this to you today. The Lord will also hand Israel over to the Philistines along with you. Tomorrow, you and your sons will be with me, and the Lord will hand Israel's army over to the Philistines." Immediately, Saul fell flat on the ground. He was terrified by Samuel's words, and it was also weak because he had not eaten anything all day and all night. The woman came over to Saul, and she saw that he was terrified and said to him, "Look, your servant has obeyed you. I took my life in my hands and did what you told me to do. Now please listen to your servant. Let me set some food in front of you. Eat, and it will give you strength, so you can go your way." He refused, saying, "I won't eat." But when his servants and the woman urged him, he listened to them. He got up off the ground and sat on the bed. The woman had flattened calf at her house, flattened calf at her house, and she quickly slaughtered it. She also took flour, kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread. She served it to Saul and his servants, and they ate. Afterwards, they got up and left that night. Okay, chapter 29. The Philistines brought all their military units together at Aphek, while Israel was camped by the spring in Jezreel. All the Philistine leaders were passing in review with their units of hundreds and thousands. David and his men were passing in review behind them with Achish. Then the Philistine commanders asked, what are these Hebrews doing here? Achish answered, "The Philistine commanders, that is David, servant of King Saul of Israel, has been with me for a considerable period of time, from the day he defected until today. I found no fault in him." The Philistine commanders, however, were enraged with Achish and told him, "Send that man back and let him return to the place you assigned him. He must not go down with us into battle, only to become our adversary during the battle." What better way could he ingratiate himself with his master than with the heads of our men? Isn't this the David they sang about during their dances? Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. Also remember, in order to marry Saul's daughter, he had to have, 200 foreskins? So the Philistines are aware of David, I think. Yeah. Verse 6. So Achish summoned David and told him, "As the Lord lives, you are an honorable man. I think it is good to have you fighting in this unit with me, because I have found no fault in you from the day you came to be until today. But the leaders don't think you are reliable. Now go back quietly, and you won't be doing anything the Philistine leaders think is wrong." "But what have I done?" David replied to Achish. "From the first day I entered your service until today, what have you found against your servant to keep me from going to fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" Achish answered David, I'm convinced that you are as reliable as an angel of God. But the Philistine commanders have said, he must not go into battle with us. So get up early in the morning, you and your master servant who came with you. When you have all gotten up early, go as soon as it's light. So David and his men got up in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Chapter 30. David and his men arrived in Ziklag on the third day. The Amalekites had raided the Negev and attacked burned Ziklag. They also had kidnapped the women and everyone in it from youngest to oldest. They had killed no one, but had carried them off as they went on their way. When David and his men arrived at the town, they found it burned. Their wives, sons, and daughters had been kidnapped. David and the troops went with him, wept loudly until they had no strength left to weep. David's two wives, Ahinoam the Jezreelite and Abigail, the widow of Nabal the Carmelite, had also been kidnapped. David was in an extremely difficult position because the troops talked about stoning him, for they were all bitter over the loss of their sons and daughters. But David found strength in the Lord his God. David said to the priest Abiathar, son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. So Abiathar brought it to him, and David asked the Lord, should I pursue these raiders? Will I overtake them? The Lord replied to him, pursue them, for you will certainly overtake them and rescue the people. So David and the 600 men with him went. They came to the Wadi Bezor, where some stayed behind. David and 400 of the men continued in the pursuit, while 200 stopped because they were too exhausted to cross the Wadi Bezor. David's men found an Egyptian in the open country and brought him to David. They gave him some bread to eat and water to drink. Then they gave him some pressed figs and 2 clusters of raisins. After he ate, he revived, for he hadn't eaten food or drunk water for 3 days and 3 nights. Then David said to him, who do you belong to? Where are you from? I'm an Egyptian, the slave of an Amalekite. He said, my master abandoned me when I got sick 3 days ago. We raided the south country of the Cherethites, the territory of Judah, and the south country of Caleb, and burned Ziklag. David then asked him, will you lead me to these raiders? He said, swear to me by God that you won't kill me or turn me over to my master, and I will lead you to them. So he led them, and there were the Amalekites spread out over the entire area, eating and drinking and celebrating because of the great amount of plunder they had taken from the land of the Philistines and the land of Judah. David slaughtered them from twilight until evening the next day. None of them escaped, except 400 young men who got on camels and fled. David recovered everything the Amalekites had taken. He also rescued his 2 wives. Nothing of theirs was missing, from the youngest to the oldest, including the sons and daughters, and all the plunder of the Amalekites had taken. David got everything back. He took all the flocks and herds which were driven ahead of the other livestock, and the people shouted, this is David's plunder. When David came to the 200 men who had been too exhausted to go with him and had been left at the Wadi Bezor, they came out to meet him and to meet the troops with him. When David approached the men, he greeted them. But all the corrupt and worthless men among those who had gone with David argued, because they didn't go with us, we will not give any of the plunder we recovered to them, except for each man's wife and children. They may take them and go. But David said, my brothers, you must not do this with what the Lord has given us. He protected us and handed over to us the raiders who came against us. Who can agree to your proposal? The share of the one who goes into battle is to be the same as the share of the one who remains with the supplies. They will share equally. And it has been so from that day forward. David established this policy as a law and an ordinance for Israel, and it still continues today. When David came to Ziklag, he sent some of the plunder to his friends, the elders of Judah, saying, here's a gift for you. From the plunder of the Lord's enemies, he sent gifts to those in Bethel, in Ramoth of the Negev, and in Jatir, to those in Aror, in Sifmoth, and in Eshtemoa, to those in Rakal, in the towns of the Jerahmeelites, and in the towns of the Kenites, to those in Hormah and Borashan, and in Athak, to those in Hebron, and to those in all the places where David and his men had roamed. Okay, last chapter. The Philistines fought against Israel, and Israel's men fled from them and were killed on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons and killed his sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. When the battle intensified against Saul, the archers found him and severely wounded him. Then Saul said to his armor-bearer, "Draw your sword and run me through with it, or these uncircumcised men will come and run me through and torture me." But his armor-bearer would not do it because he was terrified. Then Saul took his sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he also fell on his own sword and died with him. So on that day, Saul died together with his 3 sons, his armor-bearer, and all his men. When the men of Israel on the other side of the valley and on the other side of the Jordan saw that Israel's men had fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they abandoned the cities and fled. So the Philistines came and settled in them. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons dead on Mount Gilboa. They cut off Saul's head, stripped off his armor, and sent messengers throughout the land of the Philistines to spread the good news in the temples of their idols and among the people. Then they put his armor in the temple of Ashtoreths and hung his body on the wall of Bethshan. When the residents of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, all their brave men set out, journeyed all night, and retrieved the body of Saul and the bodies of the sons from the wall of Bethshan. When they arrived at Jabesh, they burned the bodies there. Afterward, they took their bones and buried them under the tamarisk tree in Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. Okay. Saul is done. We are moved on to a new book, new chapter in Israel, right? Yeah, let's go ahead and jump into our questions. Question 1. Saul's turn to the medium at Endor in chapter 28 reveals his spiritual bankruptcy. How does this descent challenge us to reflect on the theological consequences of seeking answers outside God's revealed will? I think even more so than just outside of God's revealed will, doing so in a manner that God has explicitly condemned. Now, what's really bad is there are people doing this today. This is okay. I have seen stories of things, and this is like confirmed stories. This isn't like rumors, stuff like that. Bethel in Redding, California, they have a school, the School of Supernatural Ministry, and there are things that have gone on there, even if they're not promoted straight up by the school. They are approving of a culture that is allowing this stuff to happen. So what we see is things like grave soaking, where if you're unaware, they find the grave of a prominent Christian who has passed. They'll go lay on the grave in order to, quote unquote, soak up the anointing. Christian tarot cards, a lot of New Age stuff has infiltrated a lot of their teaching. And that element is not just them. That's kind of infiltrated a lot of the church to varying degrees. But it's bad. God, not only did some of this stuff not what God said, it's actively against what God said. on how we are to conduct ourselves and things like that. They have actually said that we need to go into the new age and reclaim that stuff back for God. No, it's not reclaiming it back for God. It is. It was never God's. It's evil, demonic. You can't reclaim something demonic for God. Something that is demonic in nature is not God's. So we need to take everything back to Scripture. Everything back to Scripture. Question 2. The prophecy of Saul's death in chapter 28 comes with silence from God. How might this divine withdrawal deepen our understanding of the interplay between human rebellion and God's righteous judgment? God said that he was done with Saul, and I think he was actually done with Saul. I think that's what we saw. But I don't think we should necessarily be surprised that when God said he was done, he was done. That's a scary thing to think about. Now, there is a little bit different for us. It's not quite the same thing, but this is the reality that people face, except it will be an eternal thing. It won't be a just temporary here on earth. It will be an eternal separation from God. Question 3. Saul's tragic end in chapter 31 contrasts with David's preservation. How does this transition invite us to consider the theological tension between God's mercy and justice as he works out his redemptive purposes? We talked about this a little bit, not yesterday, but the day before, I believe. There's a balance between the idea of mercy and justice. I guess we talked about it a little bit yesterday too, but I brought up Jeffrey Dahmer. Like there's justice that's going to be had here on this earth, regardless of whether he asks for forgiveness or turns to God. And I think that's good. God likes justice. Justice is a good thing. God is just. So justice is good. And our sin, there's still payment that has to be made for our sin. Jesus already made that payment. But we can either accept Jesus' payment or we can deal with the consequences ourselves, which is not good. Yeah. So there's a balance there between mercy and justice, but it's not like they're equal opposites. They actually go hand in hand a lot. So, yeah, good stuff. Appreciate everyone watching, listening up to this point. If you're still here, like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. That way you don't miss anything we have coming out. I've got some new stuff planned coming up in a very short future. And it's going to be good. It's going to be interesting. A lot of really, really new stuff. So you don't want to miss any of it. It's going to be absolutely phenomenal. And if you don't think so, that's fine. But yeah, if this has been a blessing to you, share it. Word of mouth is the best way the podcast spread, so you can help others be blessed by it as well, and help others have a good resource to help them stick with their Bible reading on a daily basis. That's the main purpose. I started this whole Bible in a Year series, so that's what we're going for now with this, and you can help people with that as well. Tomorrow we'll be jumping into 2 Samuel, continuing the story of David and what happens now after Saul's gone. So it's interesting. David's not perfect. We see some sides of David that we've maybe not seen before, and I think that's one good piece of evidence for the Bible is that even their heroes have bad sides. Like you see the bad side. No one is painted perfectly except God. That's it, and that's accurate because no one's perfect except for God. So don't forget to come back tomorrow. It's going to be good stuff. Thanks. God bless.